A millionaire invited her maid to a birthday party to humiliate her, but when she arrived, the morning sun painted golden stripes across Emily Winchester's vast marble floors, but her eyes were fixed on something far less pristine. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows of her penthouse suite, she watched her maid Emma meticulously trimming roses in the garden below. Even in worn work clothes, dirt smudging her cheeks, Emma possessed an ethereal beauty that made Emily's manicured fingers clench around her crystal champagne flute. "How dare she," Emily whispered, taking another sip of vintage Dom Perignon. Even from the 40th floor, she could see Emma's genuine smile as she tenderly cared for each bloom. That contentment, that inner peace, despite her lowly station, it was an insult to everything Emily's family represented. A cruel smile played across Emily's perfectly painted lips as she watched her maid work. Soon, very soon, she would teach Emma exactly where she belonged. Her upcoming birthday gala would be a night no one would forget, especially not the maid who dared to be beautiful. What Emily couldn't see from her lofty perch was the single tear that rolled down Emma's cheek as she whispered to the roses, "I miss you, little sister. Everything I do for you." The wheels of fate had begun to turn, and neither woman could guess the price they would both pay for pride. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today, and if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. Money couldn't buy love. This was the first lesson Emily Winchester learned as a child. Her earliest memories were of marble halls and empty rooms, of nannies who changed as frequently as her designer clothes, and of parents who measured affection in dollar signs and business acquisitions. The Winchester Mansion, a sprawling estate that dominated the city's most exclusive neighborhood, was more museum than home. Emily's footsteps echoed through corridors adorned with priceless art, her small voice bouncing off walls that held everything except warmth. Her mother, Victoria Winchester, was a shadow that passed through rooms between charity galas and board meetings, leaving behind only the lingering scent of Chanel No. 5 and disappointed sighs. Her father, Richard Winchester, existed primarily behind his mahogany office door, his presence announced by urgent phone calls and the occasional slam of his fist on the desk. On her 7th birthday, Emily stood alone before a towering cake, surrounded by the children of her parents, business associates, strangers in expensive dresses and tiny suits. As she blew out the candles, her wish was simple: for her parents to look at her the way they looked at their quarterly earnings reports. That night, her father gave her a diamond necklace worth more than most people's homes. Her mother didn't attend the party. An emergency board meeting had called her away. The servants whispered that the Winchesters had everything except what mattered most. Emily learned to hate those whispers. To hate anything that suggested money wasn't the answer to every problem. She learned to measure her worth in brand names and bank accounts, because those at least were constant companions. But there was another secret that echoed through the Winchester mansion, one that Emily discovered on her 10th birthday. In the West Wing, behind a door that was always locked, lived her brother Thomas. Born 3 years after Emily, Thomas suffered from severe physical disabilities that the Winchesters considered a threat to their perfect image. His existence was their greatest shame, carefully hidden from the world behind thick curtains and hushed explanations about family matters. The first time Emily saw Thomas, she felt a mixture of horror and fascination. He sat in a specially designed wheelchair, his body twisted but his eyes bright with intelligence and warmth. Unlike the cold stare she was accustomed to, Thomas looked at her with pure joy, reaching out with trembling hands to touch her face. "Sister," he had whispered, and something in Emily's heart had cracked. But that crack was quickly sealed by her mother's sharp voice. "Emily, you are never to speak of your brother to anyone. Do you understand? He would destroy everything we've built." The message was clear. Imperfection was unacceptable in the Winchester world. Thomas was kept in luxurious isolation, attended by private nurses and tutors, but denied the one thing he craved most: family. Emily learned to ignore the sounds that sometimes came from the West Wing: laughter during his therapy sessions, soft singing during his lonely nights. She convinced herself that Thomas's existence was a burden, a reminder of what happened to those who didn't meet the Winchester standard of perfection. His very presence became a source of shame and resentment. The Winchester Empire was built on the broken dreams of others. Richard Winchester's business practices were legendary in their ruthlessness. Emily watched from the shadows of board meetings as her father orchestrated hostile takeovers, destroyed family businesses, and crushed startups that dared to challenge his authority. Business isn't about being nice, he would tell her. It's about winning at any cost. She remembered the day her father bought out Stevens Technologies, a promising startup that had developed revolutionary medical software. The founder, David Stevens, had begged for a partnership instead of a takeover. This technology could help millions, he had pleaded. Richard Winchester's response was to strip the company for parts, selling off the patents to the highest bidder. A month later, David Stevens was working at an electronics store, his dream shattered along with his spirit. These lessons in cruelty were Emily's true inheritance. She learned that kindness was weakness, that empathy was a liability, and that the only way to avoid being hurt was to hurt others first. Her father's proud smile when she suggested particularly ruthless business strategies became her new measure of success. As Emily grew into adolescence, her beauty became another weapon in her arsenal. She learned to use her looks to manipulate, to charm when necessary, and to destroy when desired. The same girls who sought her friendship trembled at her approach, knowing that one wrong word could lead to social destruction. Boys competed for her attention, only to be discarded when they no longer served her purpose. Her cruelty became refined, like an expensive wine aging in the Winchester cellars. She developed a talent for identifying others' insecurities and exploiting them with surgical precision. The servants learned to avoid her gaze, knowing that any perceived slight could result in immediate termination. Even her teachers at the exclusive private school she attended learned to tread carefully, aware that the Winchester name carried enough weight to end careers. The final piece of Emily's transformation came during her college years at an elite university. There, surrounded by other heirs to vast fortunes, she perfected the art of social warfare. Her parties became legendary not for their extravagance, but for the careful way she would orchestrate public humiliations of those who dared to challenge her position. She reveled in her power, in the fear and admiration she commanded. By the time Emily turned 25, she had become everything her parents had unknowingly groomed her to be: beautiful, ruthless, and utterly empty inside. The scared little girl who had once wished for her parents' love was buried so deep that even Emily herself had forgotten she existed. In her place stood a woman who measured success by the tears she could provoke and the lives she could control. Yet sometimes, in the dead of night when the mansion was silent except for the distant sounds from the West Wing, Emily would stand before her mirror and see a flicker of that lost child in her eyes. In those moments she would hear Thomas's voice calling sister and feel that long-ago crack in her heart. But by morning she would have reconstructed her armor of cruelty, ready to face another day as the Winchester heiress, the queen of her empty kingdom. 30 years ago, the Sullivan family name carried as much weight as Winchester. Emma Sullivan was born into a world of privilege, but one fundamentally different from Emily's. The Sullivans' wealth came from generations of pharmaceutical innovations that had saved countless lives. Their mansion, though impressive, was filled with warmth and laughter. Family portraits showed genuine smiles rather than practiced poses, and dinner was served at a wooden table that bore the marks of family gatherings and childhood science experiments. James Sullivan, Emma's father, believed that wealth was a responsibility rather than a privilege. He spent as much time in charity hospitals as he did in boardrooms, personally overseeing the distribution of life-saving medications to those who couldn't afford them. Her mother, Grace Sullivan, was a renowned pediatrician who never lost her compassion despite decades of seeing children suffer. Together, they taught Emma and her younger sister Sarah that true wealth was measured by the lives you touched, not the money you hoarded. The Sullivan sisters were inseparable. Emma, 5 years older than Sarah, took her role as big sister seriously. She would read medical journals to Sarah during her sister's frequent hospital stays, both of them dreaming of following in their parents' footsteps. Sarah, despite her fragile health, possessed an indomitable spirit that lit up every room she entered. But fate had other plans for the Sullivan family. On a rainy night in October, as James and Grace rushed to an emergency at one of their charitable clinics, their car collided with a truck that had run a red light. The accident was instantaneous, leaving 10-year-old Sarah and 15-year-old Emma orphaned in an instant. The tragedy that followed was swift and merciless. The board of directors, seeing an opportunity, initiated a hostile takeover of Sullivan Pharmaceuticals. In the chaos that followed, patents were sold, charitable programs were shuttered, and the Sullivan legacy was dismantled piece by piece. The fortune that remained was placed in trust until Emma came of age, with only a modest allowance provided for the sisters' care. Sarah's health deteriorated rapidly after their parents' death. The rare genetic condition she had battled since birth became more aggressive, requiring experimental treatments that the trust administrators were reluctant to fund. Emma watched helplessly as her sister grew weaker, the light in her eyes dimming with each passing day. "Promise me something," Sarah whispered one night, her thin hand clasped in Emma's. "Promise me you'll never stop helping people like Mom and Dad did." Emma made that promise, tears falling onto their intertwined fingers, never imagining how fate would test her resolve. When Sarah passed away at 13, Emma inherited everything: the remaining fortune, the family properties, and a burning desire to honor both her sister's last wish and her parents' legacy. She spent years studying business and medicine, determined to rebuild what was lost. But the more she learned about the corporate world, the more she realized that true change couldn't come from boardrooms and business deals. On her 25th birthday, Emma made a decision that shocked the few who knew her story. She liquidated most of her assets, establishing an anonymous foundation that would continue her parents' work. Then, in an act that would have seemed insane to someone like Emily Winchester, she applied for a position as a housekeeper. "The best way to help people is to understand them," she wrote in her private journal, "and the best way to understand is to walk alongside them." She chose the Winchester household specifically, having researched Emily's family and recognizing in them the same corruption that had destroyed her parents' legacy. Each day, as Emma tended the Winchester gardens and cleaned their endless rooms, she was also quietly funding medical research, supporting struggling families, and building a network of silent philanthropy that would have made her parents proud. The roses she planted bloomed with the same vibrant beauty as those in her childhood garden, each one a reminder of Sarah's favorite flowers. Her calloused hands and simple clothes became a disguise that allowed her to move unnoticed through both worlds, serving the wealthy while secretly working to build a more equitable society. The other servants whispered about her strange contentment, wondering how someone so clearly educated could be happy in such a lowly position. But Emma had learned from Sarah that true happiness comes from purpose, not position. In a final irony that would have amused her parents, Emma's net worth actually exceeded that of the Winchesters, though this fact was hidden behind layers of corporations and charitable trusts. Her unknown angel foundation had become legendary in certain circles, providing anonymous support to causes that larger charities overlooked, all while she cleaned floors and tended gardens, watching, learning, and quietly changing lives. What no one knew, not even Emily with all her resources, was that Emma had already identified Thomas Winchester's condition and was funding research specifically targeted at helping him and others like him. In her quiet moments in the garden, she would sometimes catch glimpses of him through his window, remembering Sarah and renewing her commitment to the promise she had made at her sister's bedside. Emily stood before her bedroom mirror, a glass of aged whiskey dangling from her manicured fingers as she watched Emma work in the garden below. The sight of her maid's genuine smile as she tended to the roses ignited a familiar burn of hatred in Emily's chest. But today was different. Today she had a plan. Chloe, she called to her personal assistant, who materialized instantly at her side. "I want everything you can find on Emma Sullivan. And I mean everything." She took another sip of whiskey, savoring the burn. "Hire the best private investigators. Spare no expense." The wheels of Emily's cruel plan began turning that very afternoon. As reports started flowing in, each revelation about Emma's past only fueled Emily's determination to orchestrate the perfect humiliation. She discovered fragments of Emma's history prestigious schools, followed by a mysterious withdrawal from public life, and then an inexplicable choice to become a maid. "It's almost too perfect," Emily mused, spreading photographs and documents across her mahogany desk. The fallen aristocrat playing servant. How poetic. She began crafting her invitation list with surgical precision, selecting guests who would appreciate the spectacle she planned to create. The first phase of her plan was deceptively simple. "Emma," she called out one morning, her voice dripping with false warmth. "I've been watching your dedicated work and I'd like to reward you. Would you do me the honor of attending my birthday gala as my special guest?" Emily watched with satisfaction as confusion and hesitation flickered across Emma's face. "Miss Winchester, I couldn't possibly. I have nothing suitable to wear." "Oh, don't worry about that," Emily smiled, her eyes glittering with malice. "I'll take care of everything. Consider it my gift to you." Behind the scenes, Emily's preparations were extensive and calculated. She commissioned a dress for Emma deliberately gaudy and ill-fitting, designed to make her stand out in the worst possible way. The color was chosen to clash with Emma's complexion, the cut intended to emphasize every perceived flaw. But the dress was just the beginning. Emily hired actors to pose as guests, carefully coached to engage Emma in conversations about topics she couldn't possibly understand: hedge fund strategies, yacht competitions, private island acquisitions. Each interaction was designed to highlight Emma's outsider status. The most twisted part of Emily's plan came from her investigation's greatest discovery: Emma's deceased sister. With cold calculation, Emily arranged for one of the hired actors to bear a striking resemblance to Sarah. This doppelganger would approach Emma at the height of the party, creating a moment of emotional devastation that Emily anticipated with almost childlike glee. "Make sure the photographers are positioned perfectly," she instructed Chloe. "I want every moment of her humiliation captured for posterity." The media had already been tipped off about the special guest at the Winchester Heiresses' birthday gala, ensuring maximum exposure. As the day approached, Emily refined every detail. The seating arrangement was designed to isolate Emma among the most judgmental guests. The menu included dishes that would be impossible to eat gracefully without proper training. Even the music playlist was curated to include subtle references to Emma's past life and losses. What Emily didn't notice, absorbed in her plotting, was the quiet efficiency with which Emma continued her duties. She didn't see the way Emma's eyes reflected understanding rather than ignorance when she overheard conversations about business and finance. She missed the subtle nods of recognition Emma received from certain elite guests during their preliminary visits to the mansion. The night before the gala, Emily stood in her private ballroom, surveying the preparations. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbow shadows across marble floors, fresh flowers filled the air with heady fragrance, and champagne worth more than a year's salary for most people chilled in silver buckets. Tomorrow, she whispered to herself, everyone will remember the night Emily Winchester showed them what happens to those who dare to rise above their station. She raised her glass in a mock toast to her own reflection, multiplied infinitely in the ballroom's mirrors. In her small room above the garage, Emma sat at her modest desk, writing in her journal. Tomorrow will change everything, she wrote, though perhaps not in the way some expect. She touched the locket containing Sarah's picture, a sad smile playing across her lips. The truth has a way of emerging when we least expect it, dear sister. The stage was set, the players were in position, and fate stood in the wings, waiting to reveal whether cruelty or kindness would prevail in the drama about to unfold. Neither woman slept well that night, one burning with anticipated triumph, the other carrying the weight of secrets yet to be revealed. As dawn broke over the Winchester estate, the first deliveries began arriving. Florists, caterers, and decorators moved with practiced precision, transforming the already opulent mansion into a fairy tale palace. Emily watched it all from her balcony, sipping her morning coffee and imagining the sweet taste of victory. What she couldn't know was that others were watching too. In offices across the city, certain powerful individuals reviewed their own preparations for the evening. Alfred, the legendary investor, whose name was whispered in boardrooms with equal parts fear and respect, made a single phone call. Everything is in place. Let's see if young Miss Winchester has learned anything from her father's mistakes. The wheels of fate were turning, and no amount of wealth or cruel intention could stop what was about to unfold. The evening of Emily Winchester's birthday gala arrived with a symphony of luxury cars purring up the circular driveway. The mansion blazed with light, each window a jewel box displaying wealth and power. Inside, crystal chandeliers cast their golden glow over guests, draped in designer labels and family diamonds. Emily stood at the top of the grand staircase, a vision in a custom Alexander McQueen gown that cost more than most people's annual salary. Her smile was practiced perfection as she watched the city's elite filter in, air-kissing and exchanging practiced pleasantries. But her eyes kept darting to the entrance, waiting for her evening's true entertainment to arrive. At precisely 8 o'clock, a collective murmur rippled through the crowd. Emma stood in the doorway, and despite Emily's careful planning, the sight wasn't quite what she had anticipated. Yes, the dress was exactly as ordered, an oversized, garish green monstrosity that should have made Emma look ridiculous. Yet somehow, Emma carried herself with such natural grace that the effect was oddly compelling. "Welcome, Emma dear," Emily called out, descending the stairs with calculated elegance. "Everyone, this is my special guest for the evening, my maid," she emphasized the last word, waiting for the titters of laughter that should have followed. Instead, she was met with an odd silence, broken only by whispered conversations she couldn't quite hear. Emily's first strike came during dinner. She had arranged for Emma to be seated between James Rothschild, a notoriously pompous hedge fund manager, and Victoria Chang, whose family owned half of Asia's shipping routes. The conversation was deliberately steered toward complex financial derivatives. "So," Emma James drawled, swirling his wine glass, "what's your take on the current arbitrage opportunities in emerging markets?" Emily leaned forward slightly, anticipating Emma's embarrassment, but Emma's response left her grip tightening on her fork. "Actually," Emma replied calmly, "I found the most interesting opportunities lie in social impact investments in developing nations. The returns might be lower initially, but the long-term benefits to both communities and investors are quite remarkable." Victoria Chen's eyebrows rose with interest, and soon she and Emma were deep in conversation about sustainable development projects. Emily felt her carefully orchestrated scenes slipping away from her. She signaled for the next phase of her plan. A young actress hired for her resemblance to Emma's deceased sister approached the table. She had been coached to make specific references to Sarah's favorite flowers and childhood memories. But as she began her performance, something unexpected happened. An elderly gentleman at the next table stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the marble floor. It was Alfred Morrison, the legendary investor whose presence at any event was considered a coup. He walked directly to Emma's chair, ignoring Emily completely. "My dear," his voice carried across the suddenly silent room. "I believe you dropped this." He handed Emma what appeared to be a simple business card. but Emily caught a glimpse of something else passing between them, a look of understanding that made her blood run cold. Throughout the evening, Emily's carefully planned humiliations seemed to backfire one by one. When she arranged for Emma to be asked about her education, intending to highlight her servant status, several guests nodded knowingly at Emma's mention of prestigious schools. When the conversation turned to art, Emma's knowledge of Renaissance painters left even the most cultured guests impressed. But it was the whispers that truly began to unnerve Emily. She caught fragments of conversations that made no sense. Could it be her? The unknown angel. ... Heard she saved entire communities. ... More wealth than the Winchesters. Emily's frustration mounted as she watched Emma move through the crowd with unexpected ease. Even in the ridiculous dress, she somehow managed to command respect. Guests who normally wouldn't acknowledge servants were engaging her in serious conversation. The final straw came when Emily overheard two of her father's closest business associates discussing Emma in hushed tones. "She's the one who prevented the hostile takeover of St. Mary's Hospital. Heard she bought up all the medical patents and made them public." Emily's hand shook as she drained her champagne glass. This wasn't how the evening was supposed to go. Her perfect plan was unraveling, and worse, she had the distinct feeling that she was missing something crucial. In her growing desperation, Emily decided to accelerate her grand finale. She nodded to Chloe, who began distributing tablets to select guests. On each screen was a carefully curated presentation about Emma's past, the family tragedy, the lost fortune, the decision to become a servant. It was meant to be the ultimate humiliation, exposing Emma's fall from grace. But as the tablets lit up around the room, Emily noticed something strange. Instead of the mockery she expected, she saw expressions of admiration and respect directed at Emma. Some guests were even wiping away tears. And then, in the midst of this unraveling plan, Emily caught sight of movement in the darkened doorway of the West Wing. Her heart nearly stopped. There, in his wheelchair, but sitting straighter than she'd ever seen him, was Thomas. Her brother's presence at the party was impossible. He was never allowed to be seen in public. Yet there he was, and stranger still was the way Emma looked at him, not with surprise or pity, but with what appeared to be quiet satisfaction. Thomas's eyes met Emily's across the room, and for the first time in years she saw not weakness in his gaze, but strength. The wheels of fate had turned full circle, and Emily suddenly realized she wasn't the director of this evening's drama, she was its unwitting star. As Alfred Morrison moved to the center of the room, tapping his glass for attention, Emily felt the ground shifting beneath her designer heels. Her perfect plan hadn't just backfired, it had somehow become someone else's masterpiece. And in that moment, as she looked from Thomas to Emma to Alfred, Emily Winchester had the terrifying realization that she had orchestrated not Emma's humiliation, but her own awakening to a truth she wasn't sure she was ready to face. As the evening progressed, Emily's desperation grew with each failed attempt at humiliation. She had planned this night meticulously, like a general planning a war, but somehow her weapons were turning against her. Still, she wasn't done yet. Years of crafting cruel spectacles had taught her to always have backup plans. "Ladies and gentlemen," Emily's voice rang out across the ballroom, crystal clear and dripping with false warmth. "I'd like to propose a special game," she gestured to the servants, who began distributing small, elegantly wrapped boxes to the guests. Inside each box is a task or question. Let's make this evening educational for our special guest. The boxes contained carefully crafted scenarios designed to highlight Emma's perceived inadequacies. Emily had spent weeks perfecting each one, ensuring maximum impact. The first guest opened their box and read aloud demonstrate the proper way to address a duchess at a royal gathering. Emily's lips curved into a cruel smile as she watched Emma step forward. But instead of stumbling through the protocol, Emma executed a perfect curtsy and recited the formal address flawlessly, adding, "Though I believe Her Grace the Duchess of Montgomery might prefer her less formal title, given her passionate advocacy for education reform. Several guests nodded appreciatively, and Emily caught sight of an elderly woman raising her glass in Emma's direction. Another box revealed a complex question about wine pairings for a state dinner. Emma's response included not only the correct pairings but also a charming anecdote about a small vineyard in Bordeaux that made several wine collectors in the room lean forward with interest. Box after box, Emily's traps were diffused with grace and knowledge that seemed impossible for a mere maid to possess. But Emily wasn't finished. She nodded to Chloe, initiating what she called Operation Exposure. The massive screens around the ballroom flickered to life, displaying photographs of Emma's past life. Images of a younger Emma in designer clothes, attending elite schools, standing with her wealthy family, all carefully selected to emphasize how far she had fallen. "You see," Emily announced, her voice carrying a hint of triumph, "our dear Emma isn't quite what she seems. She comes from wealth, from privilege, yet look at her now, serving drinks to those who once might have been her peers. Isn't it fascinating how far some people can fall?" The room fell silent, but not with the shocked embarrassment Emily had anticipated. Instead, there was a weight to the quiet, a gravity she didn't understand. Emma stood in the center of it all, her face serene despite the private moments of her life being displayed for all to see. "Yes," Emma finally spoke, her voice steady. "That was my life once. I was privileged to be born into a family that valued service above status, compassion above wealth. My parents, doctors both, spent their lives developing medicines for those who couldn't afford treatment." More images flashed across the screen's newspaper headlines about the Sullivan pharmaceutical scandal, the tragic accident, the hostile takeover. Emily watched in growing confusion as several of her father's business associates shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The guests began to murmur, but their comments weren't what Emily had expected. The Sullivans, weren't they the ones who developed the treatment for? Their charitable foundation saved my niece's life. I heard their patents were stolen. Emma's voice cut through the whispers. "Every path teaches us something, Miss Winchester. My journey from those marble halls to serving in them has taught me more about true wealth than any trust fund could." The party guests began to participate in ways Emily hadn't anticipated. Victoria Chen stood up, her diamonds glittering under the chandeliers. "The Sullivan Foundation funded my company's startup when every bank refused. We never knew who was behind the grant." She looked at Emma with new understanding. James Rothschild cleared his throat. "My son's rare condition, the treatment was developed by Sullivan Pharmaceuticals. After the takeover, the research was almost shelved, but an anonymous donor," his voice trailed off as he stared at Emma. One by one, guests began sharing stories of medical treatments mysteriously paid for, of educational grants appearing at crucial moments, of small businesses saved from bankruptcy by an unseen hand. Each story seemed to wrap around Emma like a cloak of dignity, transforming her ill-fitting dress from a symbol of mockery to one of chosen humility. Emily watched in mounting horror as her careful choreography of humiliation transformed into a testimony of grace. The very weapons she had chosen, exposure, revelation, public scrutiny, were being turned into medals of honor for her intended victim. Perhaps Alfred Morrison's voice cut through the growing chorus of appreciation. "We should discuss why young Miss Winchester was so eager to expose these particular details about her maids." Past his eyes met Emily's with a knowledge that made her shiver. Some might find it interesting to explore the Winchester family's connection to the Sullivan tragedy. Emily felt the room's attention shift to her, but not with the admiring eyes she was accustomed to. These were the calculating gazes of predators sensing weakness, of business titans recognizing blood in the water. Her carefully constructed evening was not just failing, it was backfiring spectacularly. The tension in the room had indeed escalated, but not in the direction Emily had planned. She stood on the precipice of a revelation she hadn't anticipated, feeling control slip through her fingers like fine sand. And somewhere in the back of her mind, a small voice whispered that the worst was yet to come. Despite the evening's unexpected turns, Emily clung to one last vestige of satisfaction. Her final act of cruelty was still to come. She touched the small remote in her clutch bag, knowing that with one press the grand ballroom would transform into a theater of ultimate humiliation. She had hired actors to recreate the night of Sarah Sullivan's death, a tasteless spectacle designed to break Emma completely. "You may have impressed them with your knowledge and grace," Emily whispered to herself, watching Emma across the room, "but let's see how you handle having your deepest wound ripped open in public." Yet even this dark pleasure was tainted by an unsettling awareness. Emily noticed subtle exchanges between guests, a nod here, a whispered word there. Her trained eye for social manipulation caught glimpses of an orchestrated resistance forming beneath the glittering surface of her party. Alfred Morrison moved through the crowd like a conductor, barely noticeable unless you knew to watch for him. A handshake with a tech billionaire, a whispered word to a media mogul, a meaningful glance exchanged with a judge. The old man was weaving something complex and purposeful right under her nose. In a quiet corner, Victoria Chen was typing rapidly on her phone, while James Rothschild made a series of hushed calls. Emily recognized the signs of power mobilizing. She had grown up watching her father orchestrate similar movements. But this time, the power wasn't flowing in her favor. Miss Winchester, a soft voice interrupted her observations. One of the younger guests, a rising star in digital media, approached with a tablet. "I thought you might be interested in this." The screen showed a live stream of social media activity. Hundreds of thousands of people were following a hashtag #UnknownAngel. Stories were flooding in from around the world: cancer patients whose treatments were mysteriously funded, students whose scholarships appeared at crucial moments, small businesses saved from bankruptcy by anonymous investments. All traced back to the same shadowy benefactor, all connecting to the quiet maid who stood in their midst. Emily's satisfaction curdled as she realized a terrible truth: she wasn't directing this evening's entertainment, she was its unwitting star. The very audience she had assembled to witness Emma's humiliation was instead bearing witness to her own exposure. In the kitchen, away from the glittering ballroom, another kind of resistance was forming. The servants, who had always feared Emily, were gathering in quiet determination. They had their own stories about Emma, how she had helped their children get into good schools, how medical bills had mysteriously disappeared, how small dreams had been quietly funded. "It's time," the head chef whispered to the butler, passing him a thick envelope. Similar envelopes appeared throughout the staff, each containing documentation of Winchester family secrets that Emma had carefully collected over years of invisible observation. Up in the West Wing, Thomas's nurses were also preparing. Years of secret therapy sessions, funded by an anonymous benefactor, had strengthened the young man far beyond what his family believed possible. Tonight would be his debut, orchestrated not by his sister's cruelty but by Emma's patient kindness. Emily remained oblivious to much of this underground movement, fixated on her final act of malice. She didn't notice how her security staff subtly redirected her hired actors, or how the technical team had quietly rewired her planned audio-visual display. "The pieces are in place," Alfred murmured into his phone. "Proceed with Phase 2 across the city." Newspaper editors received anonymous files, regulatory agencies opened sealed documents, and long-buried truths began their journey to light. The resistance wasn't just in the ballroom, it had spread through every level of society that the Winchesters had once dominated. Emma's years of quiet service had built a network of loyalty and gratitude that no amount of Winchester wealth could match. As Emily raised her glass for another toast, savoring what she thought was her moment of triumph, she remained unaware that her carefully constructed world was about to collapse. The very foundations of her power, fear, wealth, and cruelty were being undermined by something far stronger: the quiet revolution of kindness that Emma had spent years cultivating. The stage was set for a revelation that would shake the Winchester Empire to its core, and Emily's satisfaction was about to turn to ashes in her mouth. Emily raised her crystal champagne flute, tapping it delicately with a silver spoon. The melodic chime silenced the murmuring crowd, all eyes turning to their hostess. Her crimson lips curved into what appeared to be a benevolent smile, but those who knew her well recognized the predatory glint in her eyes. "Distinguished guests," she purred, her voice carrying to every corner of the ballroom. "As this evening's entertainment, I've arranged a special performance. A piece of intimate theater, if you will." She gestured toward the grand double doors, which slowly swung open. The lights dimmed dramatically and a spotlight illuminated the entrance. A young woman in a hospital gown was wheeled in on a bed, her resemblance to Sarah Sullivan striking enough to draw gasps from those who remembered the original. Emma, who had maintained her composure throughout the evening's previous humiliations, visibly stiffened. "This is a story of loss," Emily announced, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "A story of a privileged young woman who couldn't save her own sister, yet now plays at saving others through menial service." She moved to stand beside Emma, placing a hand on her shoulder that looked comforting but gripped like a vise. The scene unfolded with cruel precision. Actors recreated the hospital room where Sarah Sullivan had spent her final days. Every detail had been researched and reproduced, the specific medical equipment, the flower arrangements Emma had brought daily, even the worn teddy bear that had been Sarah's constant companion. "Watch carefully," Emily whispered to Emma, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "I spared no expense in getting the details right. The flowers are even the same roses you grow in our garden. Touching, isn't it, how you surround yourself with reminders of your failure?" The actress playing Sarah began to cough, a horrifyingly realistic recreation of the genetic condition that had claimed her life. The medical monitors beeped ominously, their rhythm increasing as the scene progressed. Emily had hired medical consultants to ensure the authenticity of every detail, her dedication to cruelty extending to perfect accuracy. "Please," Emma's voice was barely a whisper. "Stop this." But Emily was lost in her moment of perceived triumph. "Oh, but we're just getting to the best part. The part where you promised to save her, to continue your parents' work. How well has that worked out, Emma? Trading medical research for pruning my roses." The actress delivered Sarah's final lines, taken from Emma's private journals that Emily's investigators had somehow obtained. "Promise me you'll never stop helping people like Mom and Dad did." Emma stood rooted to the spot, tears streaming down her face. The gathered crowd watched in horrified silence, the entertainment having crossed a line that even the jaded elite found distasteful. But Emily wasn't finished. "Shall we show them what happened next?" she continued, her voice rising with cruel excitement. "How you spent your family's fortune on experimental treatments that failed. How you sold everything, claiming it was for charity, when really it was just guilt driving you to give away what you couldn't use to save your sister." The scene continued to its devastating conclusion. The heart monitor flatlined, the actresses performed their roles with painful realism, and Emma's past trauma was laid bare for all to witness. Emily's production spared no emotional detail, from the final grip of Sarah's hand to the devastating moment when Emma was left alone with her grief. But something unexpected was happening. As the scene played out, the guests' expressions changed from discomfort to outright anger, not at Emma, but at Emily. Victoria Chen had tears in her eyes, but they were accompanied by a look of steel-hard determination. James Rothschild was already on his phone, speaking in urgent whispers. Alfred Morrison stood watching it all, his face an unreadable mask of judgment. And now Emily declared, preparing to deliver her coup de grace, "Let's talk about what our dear Emma has been doing since then. All those hours spent cleaning our homes, serving our drinks, while pretending to be some kind of secret philanthropist, as if scrubbing floors could ever make up for." She never finished the sentence. A new sound cut through the ballroom, the steady whir of an electric wheelchair. Thomas Winchester emerged from the shadows, his appearance causing Emily to stumble mid-speech. But it wasn't just his presence that silenced her, it was his transformation. The weak, hidden-away brother she remembered was gone. In his place sat a young man with clear eyes and a straight spine, his hands steady on his wheelchair's controls. Emily's carefully orchestrated scene of cruelty began to crumble around her. She looked from Thomas to Emma, realization dawning in her eyes. The private therapy sessions, the mysterious medical improvements, the quiet strength her brother had developed, all of it suddenly made terrible sense. The spotlight that had illuminated Emma's pain now cast harsh shadows on Emily's cruelty. Her moment of triumph had become a testimony to her own inhumanity, and in the reflected light of her brother's transformation, her carefully constructed facade began to crack. What Emily didn't realize was that her final act of cruelty had simply set the stage for an even more dramatic revelation, one that would transform her carefully planned evening of humiliation into a night of reckoning she never saw coming. Thomas Winchester's voice, clear and strong, cut through the stunned silence. "Is this what we become, sister? Is this how far you'll go to prove your power?" The staged hospital scene froze mid-performance as all attention shifted to the young man who had been hidden away for so long. Emily's hand trembled on her champagne glass, a single drop of wine falling like blood on her white designer gown. "I've watched for years," Thomas continued, his voice gaining strength. "Watched from behind locked doors as you turned into everything our parents feared they'd created. But today I can't stay silent anymore." Alfred Morrison stepped forward, placing a supportive hand on Thomas's shoulder. "Perhaps, young lady, it's time for a different kind of revelation," he nodded to someone in the crowd, and suddenly the ballroom's screens flickered to life again, but this time displaying different images. Security footage from the Winchester mansion played silently Emma sneaking medical equipment to Thomas's wing late at night. Videos of physical therapy sessions showing Emma patiently working with Thomas, helping him regain strength that his family had deemed impossible. Documentation of experimental treatments, all anonymously funded, that had gradually improved his condition. "While you were planning this evening's cruelty," Thomas said, looking directly at his sister, "Emma was spending her nights helping me learn to sit upright again. While you were hiring actors to mock her sister's death, she was arranging specialists to treat my condition. Tell them, Emily, when was the last time you even visited my room?" Emily stood frozen, her perfect mask cracking as years of carefully hidden truths began to surface. But the revelations weren't over. Alfred stepped to the center of the room, his presence commanding attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, I believe it's time we understood the full story. Emma Sullivan didn't lose her fortune, she chose to give it away. Not out of guilt, but out of the same love that drove her to help Thomas, that drives her to help countless others." Victoria Chen stepped forward next, tablet in hand. "The Unknown Angel Foundation, which has funded medical research and treatment for thousands, saving companies and lives, it wasn't created from guilt. It was created from love, the same love Emma showed in choosing to work as a maid to understand those who needed help most." The crowd began to murmur as more prominent figures stepped forward, each revealing ways Emma had quietly changed lives while serving in the shadows. But it was the final revelation that shattered Emily's world completely. James Rothschild, his voice heavy with emotion, delivered the killing blow, the hostile takeover that destroyed Sullivan Pharmaceuticals, that preceded the death of Emma's parents. It was orchestrated by Winchester Industries, the same company that later buried the medical research that might have saved Sarah Sullivan. The gasps that echoed through the ballroom were nothing compared to the sound of Emily's champagne glass shattering on the marble floor. She stared at her father, who had gone deathly pale, then at Emma, who stood calm in the midst of the storm. "You knew," Emily whispered. "All this time you knew." Emma's response was gentle but firm. "I knew. But I didn't come here for revenge, Emily. I came to heal not just Thomas, but everything your family's pursuit of wealth had broken, including you." The irony was complete. Emily's calculated evening of humiliation had transformed into her own public undoing. Her cruel theatre had become a stage for justice. Her planned exposure of Emma's past had instead exposed the rot at the heart of her own family's empire. As the truth continued to unfold in that glittering ballroom, Emily Winchester finally understood something her wealth had never taught her. True power lay not in the ability to cause pain, but in the choice to heal it instead. The ballroom's opulent splendor seemed to dim as Emily Winchester's world collapsed around her. The crystal chandeliers that had once cast such a flattering light now felt harsh and exposing, illuminating every crack in her carefully constructed facade. She stood alone in the center of the room, her designer gown suddenly feeling like a child's costume, as the weight of revelation pressed down upon her. Emily Thomas's voice was gentle as he wheeled closer to his sister. "Do you remember that day? The day of the accident." Emily's face went ashen. The memory she had buried so deeply began to surface, unbidden and unwelcome. She was 7 years old again, angry that her new baby brother was getting all the attention. In a fit of jealous rage, she had pushed his stroller, just a small push, but they were at the top of the mansion's grand staircase. "Stop," she whispered, but the truth wouldn't be contained any longer. "Our parents didn't hide me away because they were ashamed," Thomas continued, his voice carrying to every corner of the hushed room. "They hid me to protect you, Emily. They couldn't bear to see your guilt, couldn't stand to watch you destroy yourself with the knowledge of what you'd done. So they built walls not just around me, but around your memory of that day." The guests watched in stunned silence as the proud Winchester heiress began to crumble. Years of repressed memories flooded back, the sound of the stroller tumbling down the stairs, her mother's scream, the terrible silence that followed. The walls her parents had built to protect her had instead created a fortress of cruelty, a prison of her own making. Richard Winchester stepped forward, his face aged by decades in mere moments. "We thought we were protecting you," he said, his voice breaking. "Every time you saw Thomas, you would become hysterical, trapped in that moment. The doctor said your young mind couldn't handle the guilt. So we made a choice. We hid him away, never spoke of the accident, let you create a new reality where your brother was simply born disabled." Victoria Winchester, Emily's mother, emerged from the crowd, tears streaming down her face. "We threw ourselves into making money, building an empire, anything to distract from the hollow space where our family's heart should have been. We thought if we could give you everything else, it would make up for what we took away." Emma stood quietly beside Thomas, her hand resting supportively on his shoulder. The simple gesture spoke volumes about the true nature of care and protection, making the Winchesters' elaborate deception seem all the more tragic. "The cruelty," Thomas said softly, "wasn't in the accident, Emily. You were a child, acting from a child's hurt. The cruelty was in the lie we all lived afterward. The cruelty was in teaching you that power and wealth could fill the void of truth and love." Emily's knees gave way, and she sank to the marble floor, her expensive gown pooling around her like spilled wine. The memories kept coming, her growing obsession with status and control, her need to humiliate others before they could hurt her, her particular hatred for Emma's genuine goodness. It all stemmed from that one moment of childhood tragedy. "When Emma came to work here," Thomas continued, "she was the first person to look at me and see not a secret to be kept, but a person to be helped. She understood that healing doesn't come from hiding pain, but from facing it with courage and compassion." The tragic irony of the evening's entertainment became clear to everyone present. Emily had tried to recreate the death of Emma's sister as an act of cruelty, never realizing she was instead reopening the wounds of her own past trauma. But "Your parents' company didn't just destroy Sullivan Pharmaceuticals," Alfred Morrison added gravely. "By burying their research to protect your family's secrets, they denied help to thousands of people with conditions like Thomas's. Your family's attempt to hide one tragedy created countless others." Emily looked up at Emma through tear-filled eyes. Why she managed to choke out? Why didn't you expose us? Why help Thomas in secret instead of revealing everything? Emma knelt beside her, their positions now reversed from all the times Emily had looked down on her maid. Because revenge doesn't heal wounds, Emily, it only creates new ones. I chose to help Thomas because he needed help, just as I choose to help others because they need help. The truth doesn't need to destroy us, it can set us free instead. The tragedy of the Winchester family lay exposed in that glittering ballroom, a tragedy of good intentions gone wrong, of protection that had become prison, of wealth that had become a wall against healing. The gathered elite of society witnessed not just the fall of a proud family, but the terrible price of choosing power over truth, appearance over authenticity. Thomas wheeled closer to his sister, reaching out to touch her hand for the first time in 20 years. The simple contact broke the last of Emily's defenses, and she began to sob, not the pretty tears she had perfected for social advantage, but the raw, ugly crying of a 7-year-old girl finally facing the truth of what she had done, and what had been done to her in the name of love. The night that was meant to be Emily's triumph of cruelty had become instead a moment of tragic catharsis, a public unraveling of decades of carefully constructed lies. As she knelt on the floor between her brother and the maid she had tried to destroy, Emily Winchester finally understood the true tragedy of her life, not the childhood accident, but the years of false protection that had turned a moment of childish jealousy into a lifetime of calculated cruelty. Just as the weight of tragedy threatened to consume the room, Alfred Morrison stepped forward once more, his commanding presence drawing all eyes. "There is more to this story," he announced, "more than even the Winchesters know." Emma rose slowly from her position beside Emily, smoothing her ill-fitting dress with dignity. "Yes," she said softly, "it's time for the full truth to be known." From her simple handbag, she withdrew a worn leather journal. "This was my sister Sarah's," she explained, her voice carrying clearly through the hushed room. "In her final days, when the experimental treatments were failing, she made a discovery that changed everything." The journal's pages revealed something extraordinary. Sarah, despite her young age and illness, had been working on her own research, building on their parents' work. Her observations, made during countless hours in hospital beds, had identified a crucial pattern in her own condition, one that mirrored Thomas's. "Sarah's last gift wasn't just her wish for me to help others," Emma continued. "It was the key to understanding both her condition and Thomas's. The Winchester Company didn't just bury my parents' research, they buried the cure that could have saved both Sarah and Thomas." Victoria Chen stepped forward, tablet in hand. "The Unknown Angel Foundation wasn't just random acts of charity," she explained. "Every investment, every grant, every saved business was part of a carefully orchestrated plan to reconstruct the destroyed research, piece by piece." That James Rothschild added his voice, "the medical advancement that helped my son." It wasn't just anonymous philanthropy. It was part of Emma's systematic effort to rebuild what was lost, to complete what her parents and sister had started. The room stirred with this revelation, but there was more to come. Alfred Morrison took center stage again, his voice grave. "Emma didn't choose to work as a maid by chance. She chose the Winchester household specifically, knowing that access to Thomas was the key to completing Sarah's work." Emily stared at Emma in disbelief. "All this time, you were healing your brother," Emma finished gently. "Using the very research your family tried to destroy. Every garden I tended, every floor I cleaned, every moment of humiliation I endured was worth it to honor Sarah's last wish to help those who needed it most." But the surprises weren't over. Thomas wheeled forward, his movements strong and precise. "Show them," he urged Emma. "Show them what Sarah's research achieved." With trembling hands, Emma opened her journal to its final pages. There, in Sarah's childish handwriting, were the last pieces of the puzzle observations that, combined with years of patient research and treatment, had led to Thomas's remarkable improvement. "The Unknown Angel Foundation isn't just a charitable organization," Alfred explained. "It's the world's largest underground medical research network, connecting brilliant minds who work in secret to help those whom the traditional medical establishment has abandoned." Victoria Chen added, Every person in this room who has been helped by the foundation was part of a larger pattern. Emma wasn't just giving away money, she was building a revolution in medical care, one silent act of kindness at a time. The screens around the ballroom came to life one final time, showing a global network of hospitals, research facilities, and treatment centers, all quietly funded by the foundation, all working together to continue the Sullivan legacy. Emily looked at the empire Emma had built from the shadows of service, understanding finally dawning in her eyes. "You didn't fall from grace," she whispered. "You chose this path. Every moment of servitude was actually leadership." Thomas finished for her. The kind that doesn't need recognition or praise, the kind that changes lives without seeking credit. But there was one final revelation that left even Emily speechless. Alfred Morrison stepped forward one last time, removing an old photograph from his jacket. "Emma didn't work alone," he said softly. She had help from someone who understood the true cost of the Winchester family's actions. The photograph showed a younger Alfred Morrison standing with Emma's parents and a woman Emily recognized instantly, her own grandmother, the family matriarch who had died shortly after Thomas's accident. "Your grandmother never believed in hiding Thomas away," Alfred explained to Emily. "She spent her final years working secretly with the Sullivans, trying to right the wrongs her family had committed. When she passed, she left everything she had to support Emma's mission." The weight of these revelations settled over the room like a heavy cloak. Emily's carefully orchestrated evening of humiliation had instead revealed a tapestry of redemption, healing, and hope that stretched far beyond the walls of her mansion. Emma stood in the center of it all, no longer the humble maid, but revealed as the architect of a quiet revolution in human kindness. Her ill-fitting dress now seemed like a chosen disguise, her years of service a deliberate sacrifice for a greater purpose. The night's final surprise was not in grand revelations or shocking discoveries, but in the simple truth that had been before them all along: true power lies not in the ability to destroy, but in the choice to heal. In the days following the gala, the Winchester mansion underwent a transformation far more profound than its usual seasonal redecorations. The heavy curtains that had kept Thomas hidden for so many years were torn down, allowing sunlight to flood the West Wing for the first time in decades. The symbolic gesture marked the beginning of a deeper change within the family itself. Emily, stripped of her carefully constructed facade, began the painful process of healing. She spent long hours with Thomas, relearning how to be a sister instead of a stranger. Their first real conversation in 20 years took place in Emma's garden, among the roses that had witnessed so much of their family's hidden pain. "I remember," Emily said softly, "touching a bloom, watching you from my window that day. I hated how you seemed so content despite everything. Now I understand you were never really serving us, were you?" Emma, still tending her roses but now openly acknowledged as the force of change she truly was, smiled gently. "We serve by leading and lead by serving. Your grandmother understood that. She taught me that true power lies in lifting others up, not pushing them down." The Winchester family's transformation became a catalyst for broader change. Richard and Victoria Winchester, confronted with the full impact of their choices, made the decision to redirect their considerable resources toward healing the damage they had caused. The first step was the establishment of the Winchester Sullivan Foundation, merging the family's wealth with Emma's existing network of care. The foundation's first act was to make public all the medical research that had been suppressed, offering hope to countless families affected by conditions similar to Thomas's. "It's what Sarah would have wanted," Emma explained during the foundation's opening ceremony. "Not revenge, but redemption. Not exposure, but healing." Thomas, whose recovery continued to progress, became the foundation's first success story. His journey from hidden shame to public advocacy inspired others to seek help, to step out of the shadows cast by wealth and privilege into the light of genuine human connection. Emily found her own path to redemption in an unexpected way. The skills she had once used to orchestrate social destruction were redirected toward orchestrating positive change. Her network of influential connections, once used for manipulation, became channels for spreading resources and hope to those in need. The mansion itself was transformed into a recovery center, its opulent rooms repurposed to serve those seeking healing, both physical and emotional. The ballroom where Emily had planned Emma's humiliation became a space for therapy and support groups, its crystal chandeliers now witnessing tears of healing rather than cruel laughter. Victoria Chen and James Rothschild, along with other members of their elite circle, joined the Foundation's board of directors, bringing their business acumen to the service of compassion rather than profit. The underground network Emma had built was brought into the light, its effectiveness multiplied by the open support of those who had once represented the very system it fought against. 1 year after the fateful gala, Emily stood in the garden she had once watched from above, her hands dirty from actually working with the roses for the first time in her life. "I understand now," she said to Emma, who still tended the garden despite her elevated position, "why you chose to keep working here even after you succeeded with Thomas. Every act of service is an act of leadership." Emma nodded, her simple gardening clothes now a chosen uniform, rather than an imposed one. "Your grandmother used to say that true wealth grows best in the soil of humility. These roses remind me of that every day." The Winchester name, once synonymous with ruthless business practices and social cruelty, began to represent something new in the city's consciousness. The family's journey from darkness to light became a testament to the possibility of change, no matter how deeply entrenched the patterns of the past might be. Thomas, speaking at a foundation event, summed up the transformation best: "Our family's greatest shame became our greatest blessing, thanks to someone who understood that revenge is less powerful than redemption, and that true healing comes not from hiding our wounds, but from using them to help others heal." The story of the millionaire maid and the family she transformed became legend in the city, but not in the way Emily had once planned. Instead of a tale of humiliation and social destruction, it became a story of hope, of the power of choosing light over darkness, of the strength found in serving others. For Emily, the greatest change was internal. The void that she had tried to fill with cruelty and control was finally filled with something real: genuine connections, meaningful work, and the quiet joy of contributing to others' healing. She kept the green dress Emma had worn to the gala, hanging it in a place of honor as a reminder of the night she had planned a humiliation and received instead the gift of transformation. The roses in the Winchester garden bloomed more beautifully than ever, tended by both maid and millionaire, serving as a daily reminder that the most powerful changes often come from the most unexpected sources, and that true wealth lies not in what we possess, but in what we give away. In the quiet moments between heartbeats, we all carry wounds that shape us. Some build walls of wealth and cruelty, thinking power can fill the void where love should be. Others transform their pain into a lighthouse, guiding others through similar storms. The choice is always ours. Sarah's last breath wasn't just an ending, it was a beginning. Through Emma's quiet strength, it became thousands of new beginnings for others. Sometimes the greatest acts of love come disguised as service, and the deepest healing arrives through helping others heal. Thomas spent years behind curtains, not because he was broken, but because others were afraid of their own brokenness. Yet in the darkness of his isolation, he found that compassion shines brightest when the world seems most cruel. His sister's childhood mistake didn't break him, it taught him that forgiveness is the strongest form of love. Emily thought she was orchestrating a performance of cruelty, but fate was writing a different story, one where her own wounded child self could finally step into the light. Sometimes we hurt others because we can't face our own pain, building empires of wealth to hide the poverty in our hearts. Every rose Emma planted carried Sarah's memory. Every act of service honored her parents' legacy. She showed us that true strength isn't in making others feel small, but in lifting them up even when they're trying to tear you down. Her sister's death taught her that love doesn't end with loss, it transforms into something greater. We're all fighting battles behind our facades, the millionaire behind her cruelty, the maid behind her humble smile, the hidden brother behind his curtains. The wounds we carry can become weapons or tools for healing. The choice isn't in what happens to us, but in what we do with our scars. Sometimes the poorest among us carry the greatest wealth, the wealth of compassion, of understanding, of the ability to see beyond surfaces to the hurting child within. And sometimes those who seem to have everything are the ones most desperately in need of love's simple touch. Your pain, like Emma's, like Emily's, like Thomas's, isn't just a wound, it's a window through which you can reach others who hurt the same way. Your struggles aren't just barriers to overcome, they're bridges to understanding others who struggle too. In the end, we're all both the wounded and the healers, the powerful and the powerless, the ones who need saving and the ones who can save. The greatest gift we can give each other is the courage to be both, to own our pain and use it to understand others, to transform our suffering into service, our trials into triumph. Remember this: when you feel most broken, that's when you're closest to becoming whole. When you're most lost in darkness, that's when you can become light for others. Your wounds are not your weakness, they're your wisdom waiting to help heal the world. Like Sarah's last wish becoming Emma's life mission, like Emily's cruelty transforming into compassion, like Thomas's imprisonment becoming a path to others' freedom, your story isn't over at its darkest point. That darkness is just the canvas on which you can paint hope for others who think they're alone in the night. In the end, love doesn't just heal, it multiplies. Every act of kindness creates ripples we may never see, touching lives we may never know. And sometimes the greatest act of love is simply choosing to be gentle with ourselves and others, understanding that we're all just wounded children trying to find our way home to love. Your tears, like Emma's as she tended those roses, aren't just drops of sadness, they're seeds of empathy that can bloom into gardens of healing for others. Let them fall. Let them water the soil of your heart until compassion grows where cruelty once lived. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and share it with those who need its message of hope and healing. Your comments below mean the world to us. Let us know how this tale of transformation resonated with you. Together, we can spread more stories that remind us of love's power to heal.